So I am glad to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Jade Aster T. Badon. Dr. Jade Aster Badon, or simply called Sir Jaa, is currently an assistant professor 6 at the Animal Biology Division, Institute of Biological Sciences at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Sir Jade is a global expert on the butterflies of the Philippines. His PhD research, The Butterfly Effect, Understanding the Effects of Typhoons on the Diversity and Population Biology of Butterfly in the Philippines, funded by a 2016 National Geographic Young Explorers grant, has generated significant new insights on the impact of typhoons on butterfly communities. And for his work on the ecology, biology of Philippine Lepidoptera, Sir Jaa won the 2021 Tony Whitten Conservation Award, announced just recently this 2022. Dr. Badon is also the president of the Philippine Lepidoptera Butterflies and Moths Incorporated, and by founding this citizen science group, PhiLep, Jade has gone on to stimulate nationwide interest in the Philippines butterfly fauna. So, everyone, let us all give a warm welcome to Sir Jaa Badon. Sir Jaa?
Right, good afternoon, and thank you for joining me this afternoon for this webinar. So, um, let me share my screen. Okay, great. So I was invited by the UPLB MNH to do a webinar, and of course I was excited because I'd like to share some of the new discoveries here in the Philippines. Today, I'm going to introduce to you some of the probably one of the most charismatic organisms here in the Philippines, and that would be the butterflies. And I would like to introduce you to, their biology, their life histories, so that some of you, especially students, will have an idea on probably want to work with on your thesis. And then if you just want to learn something about butterflies, because this idea on about the biogeography of the Philippines, probably some insects or taxa, such as insects and butterflies, can actually give us a new idea on the biogeography of the Philippines. So I hope you will enjoy this presentation. I made it. I hope I made it interesting enough. Okay. So here's my short outline. So, of course, map of the Philippines, main regions of endemism in the Philippines. You have disjunction in the distribution of some butterfly species in the country, and the Negros Arc hypothesis, which was recently published in the Philippine Journal of Systematic Biology, that will give us an insight on how new insight on the biogeography of the Philippines by looking at the distribution of butterflies, and then further evidences and questions, and then let's end with discussion and future directions of uh, research here in the Philippines. So, if you don't know, that's the Philippines right there in the middle. Luzon, Negros, Mindanao, Basilan, and Palawan. And it's very important in biogeography that we will know our neighboring countries. So you have in the north, you have Taiwan and mainland China. And then to the west, we have, of course, Vietnam. And then most importantly is the countries in the south that will be Borneo and Sulawesi, Indonesia, and of course, Papua New Guinea. So let's continue. So you now have the Philippines. So in if you're a student in biology, especially if you're taking biogeography and ecology, the first exam that I would probably give to my students would be a blank map of the Philippines, and then identify as much islands as much as you can, and that will actually test you your knowledge on how many islands you know here in the Philippines. Remember, we have what 7,000 islands, more than 7,000 islands. So the thing is that, of course, the Philippines, we used to have a lot of forests, and then I mean, there's not we still have a lot of forests left, but not that much compared to how it looked like, let's see, 70 to 100 years ago. So imagine how the forest would look like when Magellan arrived here in the Philippines. That was like what, more than 500 years ago. So that's the current condition, probably the present around here. So here's the uh, faunal here's the faunal regions of the Philippines. This is by Wainwright, based on birds, mammals, and butterfly distribution. So in this map, you have the Luzon region, and then you have the Mindoro region, and of course the Palawan region, the Sulu region, the West Visayan region, and you have the East Visayan subregion, the Mindanao subregion. But this area here can be just united as the Mindanao region. So, and this is the course map of the Philippines, and those tiny dots are the areas where they observed a lot of butterflies, or they did a lot of butterfly collection. So as you can see, you have here from Basilan to Cebu to some to Balabac, Palawan to Coron, and then you have Leyte, Catanduanes, Negros, Panay. So as you can see, they almost, I think they surveyed around 400 islands in the Philippines. So with the information that they got, they were able to have all this. We can have distinct regions or endemism here in the Philippines based on the distribution of butterflies that we have, and it's actually same with the birds and the mammals. But there are some interesting disjunct in the distribution that are still what's this are still in question mark. Like, how come this distribution is not consistent? Sometimes they have disjunct in distribution. What could be the possible explanation? So this is why the Philippines is still, this is the reason why we're still doing a lot of exploration. We're still doing a lot of surveys in order to understand, or in order to know what's in there, especially if that island is located somewhere in the middle. Then let's say, how do you think the species would be similar to the south, to the north, east, or west? So that's still a question mark to some biologists. So here's some of the distribution. I know that this is their life histories. Let's focus on the adults, and then I'm gonna give you some with the recent discoveries with the caterpillars here in the Philippines. So here's an example of a disjunct or disjunction in the distribution of some species of Philippine butterflies. This is Dilias pacithoe. And interesting is that you have the Dilias pacithoe balabaca here, Balabac. You had the Pandecta here in Palawan. And the subspecies Mera, this is a high elevation butterfly. So they're found, I don't know, we still don't know what's their exact starting elevation. So Dilias pacithoe subspecies Mera here in Luzon. And then you have the subspecies Mera here in the south. Same subspecies, and yet they are distributed far north and far south. and we haven't seen them yet here in these islands. So we still don't know. Even the people who studied butterflies before, they still couldn't find, because one would assume that they have to be somewhere in these middle islands because of this. So we still don't know. There's a possibility that we can just assume, go right here and straight here, or go right here and straight here. But how come they're on the same subspecies? So there has to be some sort of an explanation, but that's what we're trying to answer for many years and until now. Okay, next will be Pieris canidia. This one also has the same distribution with the Delia spacithoe. They are found in Luzon. They are also found in Mindanao, extreme north, extreme south, same subspecies, and not somewhere in between. So we still have to, probably it's something to do with their biology. Are they migratory? So uh, we're left with a lot of questions. But here's the interesting thing about butterflies. Since butterflies, they fly, so according to Treadaway and Schroeder, it's a bit easy to know where the butterflies will be going. So here are some of the routes of butterfly colonization to the Philippines. So first, that's through Taiwan, the Bataan Islands and the Babianes Islands to Luzon. This is the reason why some of the butterflies in Luzon are related to the ones in Taiwan and then mainland China. And then you have from southwest, you have from Borneo to Balabac, and then Palawan into the Calamian group, then to Mindoro, with a possible side branch from Palawan through the Cuyu Island archipelago towards Panay. Okay, then again from Borneo, you get you through the Sulu archipelago, and then to the West Mindanao. And then fourth, you have from northeast Sulawesi through the Kepuluan Sangir Islands and Sarangani Islands to South Mindanao, and then from Halmahera through the Talaud archipelago to southeast Mindanao. So you have Mount Hamigitan right here. That's why it makes it more interesting, because there were some colonization of butterflies towards here, especially from um, somewhere Papua New Guinea. Okay, so the Negros Arc hypothesis states that the island of Negros may have facilitated the movement and colonization of butterfly species between Mindanao and Luzon and vice versa. Although this is, I sent this to Robert Hall, who actually did a lot of the visualizations of how the Philippine Islands were formed millions of years ago. And I submitted him this Negros Arc hypothesis, and he said, interesting, but the thing is that the Philippines is still an area for research, especially in biogeography, because we have 7,000 islands. And how do you think these 7,000 islands are moving in order to form the Philippines? I'm sure some of the islands were closer to each other, and then they're farther. So we don't know how things were actually going back and forth in our country before it became like this, the Philippines. So this is around 45 million years ago, the Middle Eocene. You have Luzon, you have Zamboanga, and then you have the Negros Island, and then some that will form the eastern part of the Philippines. So with this, I would like to also thank Mr. Treadaway when I visited him in his home in UK, in Derby. We were able to discuss about his studies. So here's the current in older versions of Hall's reconstruction of Southeast Asian islands, it was a bit different. But this one is, I think this was somewhere, this was in 2002, and there's another one that was published in 2014. So as you can see, they are still working on reconstructing on how the Philippine Islands were formed. So for this publication, 45 million years ago, Middle Eocene, Philippines again looks like this. And then 40 million years ago, you have Luzon, and then you have Borneo, and then some of the islands. And then some of them are still submerged. And then you have 35 million years ago, early Oligocene. And then you have 30 million years ago. So probably from Borneo, it provided a, probably some uh some islands were got exposed and then provided a you know a gateway towards other islands, possible potential colonization. Okay, and then you have 25 million years ago, so it still looked the same. 20 million years ago, so now again, this is the reconstruction of how the islands bump into each other, and then this was 20 million years ago, then 15 million years ago. You can see Luzon's right here, and you have uh, Visayas and Zamboanga. You now have Mindoro and Palawan. Now we already know that Mindoro and Palawan is uh, is interesting because they diverge from mainland Asia right here. And then you have 10 million years ago. So there's possible ways of, how animals, especially insects, more ancient taxa could have colonized the country. Okay. And then you have 10 million years ago, and then you have 5 million years ago. I think 5 million years ago we now have an almost the Philippines. So you have Mindanao, and take a look at Negros and Zamboanga. They were like very close. And then you have 5 million years ago, and then this is now the present day Philippines. So as you can see, the islands went through a lot of ups and downs, movements, bumping to each other, and then it became like this. So we don't know how the Philippines will look like uh, thousands or millions of years in the future. So things could still be changing. So with that, let's talk about the Delias butterflies of the Philippines. We currently have around 19 species, and 12 species are endemic to this country. So as you can see, they're mostly yellow, white, black, and red. That's very distinct of this group of pyrids. And then you have the Delias singapura, subspecies Yusuke, only found in Palawan. This one is the Dilia singapura indisticta from Borneo. So as you can see, it arrived in Palawan through Borneo, possibly making a stop in Balabac, then establishing a new subspecies in Palawan. And then this one, Dilias themis sotera. So this is another endemic butterfly here in the Philippines. And as you can see, it is mostly distributed in all major islands except Palawan. And then, as what I've said before with the Dilias pasithoe mera and Pyrus canidia, this group also has a very interesting disjunct in the distribution. So you have Dilias baracasa in Mindanao and Basilan. You have Dilias baracasa benguetana. So you know where it was collected. It was collected in Benguet in North Luzon. And we have not collected or documented this butterfly somewhere here in the middle. And then same, You have Dilias noidaorum tagay in South Mindanao, and you have Dilias pawayensis here in North Luzon. Different species, but they almost look the same. But how come it's not, they don't have like an intermediate somewhere in the middle? And then you have this Dilias woody. This is all, you can only find this in Mindanao. And then here's another one again with a very interesting distribution. You have Dilias blanca. Then you have Dilias, another Dilias. You have again Luzon and Mindanao, far north and far south. And you have Dilias levicki, only found in Mindanao. And then you have the Dilias apuensis, Mount Apo. Now this one's interesting. Now I keep on saying that there's a disjunct with Luzon and Mindanao. Now same group, this one could say that this is the intermediate of the ones in the north and Luzon. You have Dilias ganymedes. You can only find this in Negros, Panay, and Mindoro, but not in Luzon and Mindanao. So if you take a look at Dilias ganymedes and then look at Dilias noidaorum, Luzon and Davao, you can say that they are somewhat closely related. And this one, so we discussed about Dilias ganymedes. This is now another Dilias georgina. You can only find this in Luzon. And they almost, again, look similar with the other species found in Mindanao and somewhere in Negros, Panay, and Mindoro. And then this one, Dilias shonigi, found in Mindanao. Again, look at the coloration and pattern. They almost look the same. And then you have this one. We thought that this Dilias can only be found in Mindanao, but they can also be, there's a new subspecies that we described in 2016, and that was the Dilias diaphana tridawi here in Panay Island. And then another disjunct, Dilias paracasa. You find the other subspecies here in Mindanao, and then the other subspecies in North Luzon. But again, nothing in between. That's why I keep working here on Negros Island, going around Mount Talinis and then hoping that I will find. So far, none. And then this one is probably some of the like a summary. So you have this distribution of similar looking Dilias. You have Dilias georgina, Dilias pawayensis here. And then you have Ganymedes somewhere in the middle. And then you have Shonigi noidaorum. And of course, the Georgina cinerescens from Borneo. So with the Negros arc hypothesis, there's a possibility that with the presence of Georgina here, there's a possibility that this Georgina probably jumped to Negros and then got stuck in Luzon. Then when Negros and Zamboanga went down, probably it got, who knows, because in this junction, there's also a possibility of it got extinct, locally extinct in the island. So there's a lot of what ifs and some possibilities that this could be the possible reason. And it's an area that we need further research. Now this is again Dilias levicki, apuensis, and there's another one here in Diaphana. So probably reached here through Negros. So I'm still trying to find it in Negros. So again, it's not just me who questioned this first. This was actually, there were a lot of questions in the past. So there is a strong relationship of milkweed butterflies on Borneo Luzon Island, and Sulawesi. So this was by Wainwright. So you have a strong connection with Borneo, Luzon, and Sulawesi. So what could be the possible explanation on that one? And then, and then you have Van Balgoy from his very extensive study of plants in Malay archipelago concluded that exchange directly across the Makassar Strait has always been difficult. And probably there was an ancient Celebes Philippine continent lying outside of Java and Borneo. So again, with this is probably why Wallace wasn't able to put a line here and not stop somewhere here. Wallace was like, I don't know where to put Philippines. So um, I think that makes that makes Philippines an interesting field, because that will make us really do research and exploration, because a lot of people would try to put the Philippines will try to put a line where the Wallace line would go in the Philippines and where it will exit. So I think that's still a research that's been going on, especially I think they did it with frogs and then birds, and then there's still that's because we have a lot of regions of endemicity. Now you have this butterfly Thoresa hustini, named after Justin Nuida. So this species is only known in the Philippines and currently distributed in Luzon and Leyte. And Dijon and Treadaway noted that this species may have arrived from the Philippines through Taiwan. But Nuida and Kitamura noted that the species may have arrived in the Philippines from the south. But Dijon and Treadaway stated that it is highly unlikely since the genus is absent from the Sundaland. So well, I mean, this is what happens when you work with biogeography. We tend to say it's probably coming through here. No, it's probably coming from the south, but it's not here. So a lot of questions and a lot of studies that needs to be done in order to answer a lot of questions. So maybe I would say maybe that this species may have arrived in Leyte through the from Luzon to Negros Arc. Remember that Negros was close to Luzon before, and it went down, and then they were close, highly close associated with Zamboanga Peninsula, and probably that's how it got to the Mindanao region. So there's a possibility that this species also occurs in Mindanao. So that's still a an area of research. Probably if you're in Mindanao, if you're able to photograph this specific butterfly. Another one is Lifera brasolis, a very rare butterfly in the Philippines with two subspecies, one from Luzon and other one from Homonhon, which belongs to the Mindanao faunal region, according to Treadaway and Schroeder. So you have now a Luzon, and then you have another one in Mindanao. So there's a lot of disjunct in the distribution, and Luzon and Mindanao is they're always associated with each other, and then hopefully we can find answers somewhere along the middle. Okay, so we already talked about the adults. And let's talk about this interesting butterfly, Euplea, Euplea unis. So Euplea unis, described by Goddard in 1819. General distribution. Take note of the general distribution. Indochina, Sumatra, Java, Borneo, Philippines, Taiwan, south coast of China, and then you have Ryukyu Island and Guam. And there are two recognized subspecies here in the Philippines. You have the subspecies Oculata. It's distributed throughout the Philippines except Balabac, Calamian, Sibutu, and Palawan. And then you have the subspecies Syra. Its distribution, of course, if it's not throughout the Philippines, it will be Balabac, Calamian, Sibutu, and Palawan. Okay. So if you see some, they're very nice to see when they're flying, because they will sometimes give you that blue iridescent. Okay, I think. Okay. So Here is going back to the map of the Philippines. You now have the caterpillar of this. It was documented in Igarashi and Fukuda that the caterpillar of this species is looks like this. They photographed this in Mount Makiling. So this is the one in Luzon. But I was able to photograph this last year, and it says that it could be a Unis. So I said, based on Igarashi and Fukuda's work, it has to look like this. How come mine here in Negros doesn't look similar? So I reared it, and then it was actually a Euplea unis. Now remember, Euplea unis has two subspecies, the one throughout the Philippines and the one for Palawan and Cebu. Now, how come same subspecies, but yet if you take a look at their caterpillar, they look very they don't look the same. And another one, my colleague Christy Burles was able to document another Euplea unis caterpillar, and it looks similar to what I have. Now, some would use my first reaction was like, I mean, it can't be, or something like, why is how come they have to be the same caterpillar because they're in the same subspecies. And then after some information, this was compiled by Keith Wolf, my colleague Keith Wolf. This is now the one from Negros and Bohol. This is the one from Luzon. Now, take a look at the bigger picture. This species is also distributed again in other parts of Southeast Asia and towards here in Papua New Guinea. Now, we can see that this caterpillar is, I would say, closer to the ones in Borneo. And then this one closer to the ones here in Indochina, possibly with Taiwan. Now, looking back at the colonization routes here in the Philippines, you could say that the ones from Luzon subspecies coming from the north, and this one was coming from the south. And the subspecies Syra in Palawan, we haven't documented it yet because this one is just recent. It was just interesting to know that the subspecies in the caterpillar that was documented in Luzon does not look the same with the one in far south, especially Negros and Bohol. So I would expect that the caterpillar in Palawan would probably look something like this. Now, how about the ones in Luzon? How about the ones in Mindoro? Do you think it will look the same? How about the ones in Panay? How about the ones in Mindanao? Remember that here in Mindanao, you now have the white forms. So it is still an area, and with the work of caterpillars, we can actually map the routes of colonization of some butterflies or probably other taxa here in the Philippines. So it's still an area of research. I mean, lot of possibilities. So here's the recently documented life history of Athema gotama. This is a weird looking caterpillar. So that's the egg. So I'm just gonna brush through this thing because you can also do something like this. I spent many days going back and forth to Mount Talinas just to document this specific butterfly. So once it hatched, this tiny caterpillar would usually find the edge of the leaf and will start crawling towards here and start feeding. And then it will make this frass chain. Once threatened, it will retreat here. This is like its protective place. And then you have this. I tried putting him here so that I will know what happens if I place them somewhere in the middle. And then started crawling until it find its way to the edge of the leaf, and then starts again following the edge of the leaf, and then start feeding again. And then it feeds like this, and then it feeds like this. So that's the pattern of feeding. And then that's I think this is probably I don't know which instar But then you now have this, it will start growing, and then that's how it looks like. And then it turned greenish. No need the flash chain. I think it's mature enough to defend itself. And then it looks like this, greenish and some pink coloration. And then this is the wandering stage. It will find a place to wander. Of course, wandering stage, or meant to pupate. And then it attaches to, if it can find a site now, it will attach, making that cremaster, and then it will hang, and then it turns into pupa. And then that's how it looks like. So this is now the pupal stage. And then this is what I kind of like want to see it like this. Looks like the very formal pupa. And then later stage, you can see the wings, and then the adult just emerged. So why study life history? So this is the one that was documented, same species but different subspecies. This one was from Palawan by Igarashi and Fukuda. And then this the one from Negros by me and Keith Wolf. So as you can see, they all look the same. And then with the pupa, you can see the ones in Negros are a bit more pointy compared to this one. So now, Athema gutama, different subspecies, almost same looking caterpillar. And then you have Euplea unis oculata, same subspecies, and yet they have very different caterpillars. So when this was published, and of course a lot of people worldwide will able to read it, and then that will actually get you an idea that a lot of people would say it resemble a lot to Adelpha. And Adelpha is a genus of butterfly that can be found in Mexico down to South America. And then so very similar in appearance of the ovum, larva, and pupa to our African genus Pseudocrea and Neptis. And even the larval feeding pattern is the same. So what can you say about this? So do you think this trait, characteristic, or pattern, or larval feeding pattern is consistent with other groups, or this is derived? So here's the current study by Kawahara about the evolution and diversification dynamics of butterflies. As you can see in that current study, that butterfly highly originated from the Americas. So how about this? Do you think they resemble a lot to Adelpha? This could be another, mapping out some of the species, and of course genera of butterflies that will have same life histories, and then same feeding pattern. So you now have something you documented something from the far south, far east Philippines, and then you have something that similar in South America, and then in Africa. So that is very interesting to learn. And you can do that, guys. If you see some caterpillar, I mean, try to observe it and then document it. So I think I already talked a lot. So acknowledgements, I would like to thank my advisor, Thomas C. Emil. This was during my graduation in 2018. And then, of course, the McGuire Center, the Department of Entomology and Hematology, the Museum of Natural History of UPLB, the Animal Division of IBS, University of the Philippines, Baños, Silliman University, and some of my colleagues, my advisor, and then Colin G. Treadaway, Andrew D. Warren, Andrei Surkov, David Lohman, Keith Wolf, Robert Hall, and Mr. Justin Nuida. So this is me having a conversation with Colin G. Treadaway. He passed away in 2019 at the age of 95, and I got the honor to meet him in 2017 in his house in Derby, UK, and we really talked. We just discussed about butterflies, and that's it. Distribution and some interesting things about what happened during his expedition here in the Philippines. He started working with butterflies here in the Philippines in 1952 or 1953. Then, of course, you have Justin Nuida. So this was me before there was the COVID lockdown. I went to Manila and then met Justin Nuida to discuss. And after that, we were able to describe some new subspecies when I curated his collection, and we look at some of the old publications of butterflies in Southeast Asia, and we just talk. And thank you. If there are questions, feel free to ask.
So, thank you, Sir Ja, for that interesting and wonderful presentation on our butterflies here in the Philippines, and of course in Philippine biogeography. And again, for those who would like to Sir Ja some questions, please do type it in the chat box. And okay, so I have a surprise for everyone. We will deviate from our usual program, and I will be introducing a special, surprise guest. And while
Okay.
you are typing your questions in the chat box, I would like to call on our special guest who will be moderating the open forum. And our special guest is no other than our curator for geometric moths and spiders, faculty regent, and professor, UP scientist, Dr. Amy Lynn Barrion Tupo. Ma'am Amy?
I think there's a question here.
Okay. So while we're waiting for Ma'am Amy to turn on her video and her, I think her um, mic, there's a question from Aaron James Ortega. Could the location of Eastern Visayas being vulnerable to strong typhoons, could it be a factor why there are lesser occurrence of established subspecies in the region?
Okay, this is an interesting question. Could the location of Eastern Visayas late this summer being vulnerable to strong typhoons a factor why there are lesser occurrence of established subspecies in the region? Actually, there's actually a lot of endemic species of butterflies in the Leyte and Samar region. But talking about typhoons, um, it could be a factor, it could also be not. But what we understand with typhoons mediating the taxa here in the Philippines, especially for butterflies, remember that butterflies are also dependent on its host plants, where they can lay their eggs or where they can feed. And with typhoons, sometimes I was surprised with the results with my research that if typhoons just recently passed by, sometimes you will get species that they don't look fresh. They look worn and old, and we weren't able to document them before the typhoon. So there's always the question after that research on, if that's the case, do you think these butterflies were following the typhoon, or they got blown out? They got blown to the other places due to the strong winds. So, with the strong typhoons, I I still don't know if it can be a factor on why there are lesser occurrence of established subspecies in the region. But I think it could also be that there's just too much disturbance. There's just too much disturbance that a lot of some populations probably cannot recover immediately, because some of them takes a while, and then some of them, after the disturbance, expect that a lot of species probably dormant during that stage will start emerging. So I think your question probably is a good area of research, because the ones that I have generated out of questions. So probably this another question probably you can do a before after typhoon and just study the population communities, the different species, or better would be population dynamics of some species. So I hope that answered your question.
All right. So thank you. We already have Ma'am Amy here in the room. Ma'am Amy, you can take the floor.
Thank you, Jaa. Um, can you hear me? Is
Yes,
my audio
yes.
clear? Okay. So we experienced a power outage here after the thunderstorm, and we're supposed to have our power back by 9 p.m.
Wow.
So these are interesting questions about typhoons, but I would like to deviate from that question to another one where I tried superimposing the distribution of plants, host plants, for instance, in trying to explain the disjunct distribution of these butterflies.
Okay, so
And
what was the question
my
again? Was
internet
able?
is choppy.
Okay.
Have you tried looking at host plant data to explain the disjunct distribution of certain butterflies like Delias pacinto?
Mm-hmm.
Because their host plants are usually Taxilus,
Mm-hmm.
Loranthus. Have you
Mm-hmm.
tried superimposing that kind of data?
So far, none. So because some of this uh butterfly, yes, they feed on mistletoes, and we I think some of them are still undocumented on which species. So I don't know if they're very specific to all the the genera of mistletoe, or they're very species specific. Yeah, that's actually um, a good data to have. So far, uh, I haven't checked. Yeah, it could also explain the disjunct distribution.
Yeah, maybe for our listeners who are students, you may want to pursue
Yeah.
this as an additional research. For instance, I think Delias Blanca and Teresa Giustini, they don't have any host plants recorded, right?
Yeah.
So these are very important avenues for research later on. And let me read through the questions from our chat box. Okay, we have a question here. How significant is the Wallacean line with regards to the distribution of lepidopterans in the Philippines?
So how significant is the Wallace line in regards to the distribution of Lepidoptera here in the Philippines? That is an interesting question, but I would say that the Philippines is still a like a crossroad to the Wallacea, as what the authors would say, because they cannot draw a line. But how significant is the Wallace line is because the Wallace line actually gives you an idea that the animals, there's a like a division that uh, east of Wallace Line there will be very like the Australian region, and then west of Wallace Line you have the Oriental region. Now with the Philippines, I think it still belongs mostly to the um, Oriental region, but the line cannot be drawn, as what I've said. That's because of the areas of colonization. You have butterflies colonizing east of Walasayan to Mindanao, and then you also have butterflies colonizing the Philippines from the west part of the Walasayan, such as Borneo, and then you also have from the north. So I think they sometimes would just say, just keep the line, just keep the line there. A lot of uh, biologists would say, we'll just keep the line there because the Philippines, it's probably in the next few years, or let's say 10 to 20 years, we will have an idea on what would be the possible uh, let's see, what's the position of the Philippines to the Wallace line, or how significant is the Philippines to how significant the Wallace line to the Philippines. So right now, we'll just leave it as it is. It will just say that it's a crossroad between the east and the west of Wallace line, and this is the reason why we have a lot of endemic species too. So I hope that answered your question.
Okay, so for now, let's leave the line as it is. But let's move on to other disruptions. From typhoons, let's move on to disruptions like volcanic eruptions. So Kaka wants to know, can volcanic eruptions be a factor for butterfly endemism?
Okay. Oh, typhoons, volcanoes. I mean, I don't know how to do research like that with volcanoes erupting. So, do you think volcanic eruptions can also be a factor of butterfly endemism? Now, I think a great example would be here in Negros. You have Mount Canlaon in the north, but that area is active and currently, have some occasional explosions or eruptions. And then you have here in the south, you have Mount Talinis or the Mount Talinis range, who's, it's still there. It hasn't, I don't know when's the last time it erupted, but there's been an explanation that with volcanic eruptions, you will have again an avenue for other species to colonize after the volcanic eruption. So you have volcanic eruptions, a lot of those organisms that were there, if they weren't able to move immediately, of course they will die, such as the plants. And then if there will no more plants, then the other animals will follow. It's either you have to go somewhere to find food, or you will gonna go get killed by the volcanic eruptions. Now, after the volcanic eruptions, there's going to be the recovery. So I'm guessing with volcanic eruptions, the recovery will be gradual. So that will give an idea that now that will give an opportunity for some of those butterflies to recolonize again. And then probably with the new plants, with the new host plants, recolonizing the area, this will provide them any uh, an opportunity to inhabit the area again. This is why there are some species here in Negros Island. You can only find it in Mount Canlaon. That's also the reason why a lot of collectors would usually visit Mount Canlaon, because they know that possibly that due to volcanic eruptions, there's going to be a lot of recolonization, and then extinction, local extinction, recolonization, and then that could, yeah, I would say it could be a factor of butterfly endemism, because a mountain, you have a volcano, and then some butterflies are very elevation specific. So if they want to stay in that elevation, then somehow with the right isolation, then they could also be an area for, or a factor for endemism. So I hope that answered your question, uh, Ms. Diskaya.
Okay, we now have a question from Aaron, very much related to my earlier question on host plants. So for those of us who would like to observe endemic butterflies or larvae, are there any indicators or host plants that we should look for to increase our chance of finding them? It's like a raffle, increased chance of winning for a particular host plants. Can you recommend some?
Okay, for those who would like to observe endemic butterflies larva would be interesting, because you can see, different colorations and patterns, and then voila, when it's adult, that would be the most interesting part, because chances are that's probably be new to or new to science. So here's what I can recommend. Honestly, it's a bit difficult, but first you have to have good eyesight. Next, you need to look at the leaves if you see some damage. Most of the time, it's probably other beetles, other insects, but just take a look at the damage of the leaves. Probably they're somewhere there. And then host plants. Go online, go to Google and then search butterflies, Philippines, and then there's a record of known host plants. So common is the, of course, the lemoncito. You have all those swallowtail butterflies, and then if you want something rare, okay, I would recommend Loranthus or the mistletoe. Try looking for that mistletoe, and then I think Shureya, and then Uncaria. Uncaria hosts a lot of endemic nymphalid species. The one that the one that I just showed you that I documented, it feeds on Uncaria. It's a rubia. It belongs to the rubia family plants. I forgot the common name for that one. And if you're in the mountains, take a look at the Selaginella ferns, because there are endemic butterflies in the Philippines that feeds on Selaginella on the ferns. And then what else? Some endemic trees that we have here, Cratoxylum, and then you have okay, uh, there's a lot of plants. I mean, if you go online, it will give you some plants. But first, if you're in a forest or you just happen to be somewhere near dense forest, walk along the trail and then just observe what you can. That's what I usually do. I go into the forest and then take a look at this interesting plant and then spend like a minute looking at it, just to take a look if there are some caterpillars. This is the right time that you will be looking for caterpillars, because it's rainy days and a lot of butterflies will be emerging, so a lot of them will be laying eggs, and then maybe you can find some. Probably it's just somewhere in your garden, so probably it's also a moth, so also a higher chances of finding a moth caterpillar too. So I hope that gave you, and I hope that was, you know, helpful information if you would like to document life history of butterflies.
Yes, I think we could allot our efforts for opportunistic observations in the field if you're very much interested on this. Since you already mentioned some of the resources for butterflies and butterfly history observations, can you also share something that would help our audience who are interested in butterflies on accessing information for immature stages and also for rearing information?
Okay. So far with if you're on Facebook, go to Philippine Lepidoptera. We have so much. We have a lot of submissions of caterpillars, but the thing is that um, we cannot identify them because, of course, we have to wait them until it emerges. But you can also visit butterflies of Singapore and butterflies of India and some butterflies in China, Vietnam, Thailand. They have uh, they have some publications or resources on the life histories of known butterflies. The problem here in the Philippines is that there are submissions, but sometimes we cannot rear them successfully because of some other factors. So sometimes we are left with some unknown caterpillars. So, but again, there are some experts that will comment that commented on our submissions of caterpillars that this is probably this caterpillar because it looks similar to this caterpillar from India. So uh, yes, there are websites, but unfortunately not all, because we have 927 species here in the Philippines, and I don't know how much of it or how many of that 927 species have described life histories. So that's still an area, an avenue for research. So uh, I hope that was helpful to helpful information. Yes, there are other online resources that uh, we can search or compare.
Yes, and if I may plug the Philippine Lepidoptera Facebook page, which you are also managing, uh,
Oh,
it is very active in terms of giving feedback in terms of identification. Should you interested in pursuing this kind of work, you would we would encourage you to contribute your photos there. And before we move on to the question of our curator, Dr. Leticia Afuang, let me just read the comment of Dr. Lit. He's also our curator at the entomology section regarding the question of volcanic eruption. So for Dr. Lit, uh, his guess is it would depend on the type and extent of eruption as well as the frequency. And then from our curator, Dr. Leticia Afuang, how do you relate butterfly distributions with PAIC?
okay. So how do you relate your butterfly distributions with the pike? So that's the Pleistocene aggregate. Forgot that was one of the questions in my assignment with my class. So how do you relate your butterfly distributions with the pike? So pike is something that the area of um endemicity here in the Philippines. So uh, with the distribution of butterflies, I would say that some or most species would usually agree with pike. Yes, I still agree with pike because there when the yeah that's the Pleistocene aggregate island complex. That's because when uh, when when the Philippines were during the Pleistocene, as you can say, some islands are connected. So it paved way for butterflies to colonize some of the nearby islands. Now with the butterfly distribution, remember that butterflies are more ancient taxa. So some butterflies evolved around Miocene. So we can say that there's probably an area of endemism rather than the Paik before Pleistocene. So with that question, I would still say that yes, the butterfly distribution still agrees with the Paik here in the Philippines. That's because during that time, a lot of butterfly species have been have already established in those islands. And then with the disjunct distribution, that is something that we are still trying to answer. So it could be a different scenario, but it's still part of the I think the problem here is, well, we don't have that much with the remaining forests that we have. So we still don't know here in the past what was the extinction rate in the past. That was always the question. What happened to some of the butterflies in the past that are not here? So that's still again an area of further research. I hope that answered your question, Ma'am Letty.
Okay, so I'm down to my final question. I'm supposed to ask a Miss Universe type of question. But maybe just for curiosity's sake, we noticed that from the subspecies of caterpillars you have observed, have you tried investigating on the influence of secondary plant metabolites on the differences between subspecies?
Okay, that is an interesting question. Yes, the secondary metabolites can affect the life history of um, uh, of, of butterflies. But but here's the thing with secondary metabolites. I haven't read anything yet. I think that's another uh, area of research, especially if you're dealing with uh, pest caterpillars, or because some of these caterpillars are pests, and then some of these caterpillars just aren't. And then with secondary metabolites, how it will influence, I would say, I mean, I've seen and I've read some caterpillars that were rare on some different host plants, but so far they are the same, just some slight variation on the. It depends. If your caterpillar has a very transparent skin, then sometimes it will have some different shade of coloration. But yes, I would say that that is another interesting research, because you can use caterpillars to determine if your plants are healthy. So they have also this secondary metabolites, or not. So it depends on their concentration. So far that's my answer. So I hope I answered the question.
Okay, thank you, Jaa. So there you have it. We
Mhm.
learned a lot. Apart from distribution, we realized that there are still several avenues to pursue in terms of butterfly research. And if you're interested to know more, Jaa can be easily found at the Institute of Biological Sciences. But currently, you are still in Negros, right?
Yeah, I'm still in here in Negros.
But their audience can contact you easily through the
Yes,
Philippine Lep and your
I
email,
have.
right?
Yes, yeah, in my email I have students. Right now I have students who are working on. No, I don't. I mean, I have students from other universities who are actually sending me some of their thesis, undergrad thesis, and they said, "Can you just look at my? Can you look at the butterflies that we collected?" And that's actually nice, because I'm actually excited whenever, sir, we collected here in this part of the in part of the islands. Like, okay, I'm gonna check. Sometimes it's the reason why I stay awake until 1 a.m. Wow, interesting. So it's here. So this butterfly is here. So this butterfly is here. So that's what I usually uh, uh, say. And then also have some butterfly. I think one interesting one is he owns a resort in Palawan, and then of course he maintains a garden and a huge forest. And then he took a picture of an interesting caterpillar, and he said, "Do you know what's this?" And I said, "No, I actually don't know what caterpillar that is, but I know that it belongs to this group." And then I told him, "Rear it, and let's say what species it will become." And then when the adult emerges, it was actually a near threatened butterfly. That was the only that was once. That was the only time that we documented that caterpillar. And that was a Euplea swineson, a near threatened butterfly. Okay, thank you, the
Okay,
mystery.
thank you very much, Ja. May I turn
Sure.
over the microphone to our host, Flor?
Hello. Thank you very much, Ma'am Amy, for facilitating the open forum. And thank you once again, Sir Ja, for the great discussion. All right. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. And
Thank you.
before we proceed to
Picture.
the closing program, let me just remind everyone that I have posted on the chat box the link to the evaluation form. So let me just share my screen. Finally, let us give this certificate of appreciation to Sir Jaa, and it reads Certificate of Appreciation is being awarded to Jade Aster T. Badon for serving as resource person during the UPLB Museum of Natural History Biodiversity Seminar on butterflies and its life histories, new insights on the biogeography of the Philippines. Held today, June 8, 2022, 3 to 4:30 p.m. by Zoom, and it's signed by our director, Dr. Marian P. De Leon. So, Sir Jade, maraming salamat po. Ma'am Amy,
Thank you. Thank
maraming
you.
salamat din po. And before we end, just inviting you to everyone to check our website. It's at mnh.uplb.edu.ph. You could write us at mnh uplb@up.edu.ph. You can follow us, like and subscribe our social media accounts. It's on Facebook. We are on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. Just look for the handle UPLB Museum and check out our articles at Wikipedia and TripAdvisor. Once again, maraming salamat po, Sir Jaa, for accepting our invitation, and to all our regular participants, please stay tuned on our social media accounts to get announcements on our next biodiversity seminar.